anticipated. It had been building up for quite some time, and when it finally happened, it was almost like a baby being born after a long pregnancy, you know. And so we see on September 3rd, 1939, war declared. And this may be a little bit surprising to Americans, because I think in American history, the beginning of World War II was sometime later, sometime in 1941. Is that right, Phoebe?
Right, we didn't join the war until several years after it had started.
And for many Americans, if I may say so, I guess it's true in every culture, but Americans especially tend to see the world through American eyes. And so for Americans, the war began when America joined the war. But actually, the war began earlier than that. And we could even say that perhaps for some of those countries in Eastern Europe, the war began before September 3rd, 1939. Maybe it's the British perspective that says it began on September 3rd. In any case, war was formally declared, and we're going to learn a little bit of background about this and see how this declaration of war came about. Paul, can you explain the term "to declare war"? What's the idea here? Does that mean that people start fighting each other? What actually is a declaration of war?
Well, it's possible that fighting actually started some before that, or even that fighting has not yet started. The declaration of war is an official act of the government to say we are officially at war with this other country.
Now, why would a country declare war? Why make an official statement to another country and to the world, we are at war with another country? Why would a country do this?
Well, one reason would be to condemn the actions of another country, saying what you have done is so terrible that we have to go to war with you, which I think is largely what happened in this case. When Germany attacked Poland, France and Britain and some of the other countries of Western Europe said, this is so terrible that we have to declare war. This is not acceptable.
Okay.
And war is also declared so that the peoples within the country, I think, can prepare certain protocols for war. The
right.
production of goods, or certain armies are deployed when war is declared.
Also, when one country is at war with another, that entails or implies that certain things are going to happen. For example, if one country declares war against another, that means that shipping, the transport of goods to and from the enemy country may be interfered with, you know. And also it gives third parties, other countries, notice. It warns and advises them that there is a state of war and that it might affect them, as in the case with World War II. When Britain and France declared war on Germany, then Germany's allies realized that they were now going to be involved in conflict with Britain and France, and this would affect all sorts of things. And so it's an important thing that governments do to declare war. How would you say that in Chinese, Yvonne, to declare war?
就是对某一个国家宣战。
All right, well, let's take a look at the story. Bottom right-hand corner of page 37. Phoebe, can you read that first paragraph, please?
September 3rd, 1939, war declared. On September 1st, 1939, Adolf Hitler's German forces attacked Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. This was the beginning of what later came to be known as World War II. It was truly a world war. By the end of the fighting in 1945, nearly 60 nations had joined in on one side or the other.
Okay, thank you, Phoebe. So, 60 years ago today, this war began. It was declared. And I guess you could say the event that really caused this declaration of war was the attack on Poland by Adolf Hitler's German forces. And other things had happened prior to this, but this was the thing that provoked Britain and France to declare war. This was done on September 1st, and 2 days later, on September 3rd, war was declared. And this was the beginning of what came to be known as World War II. Paul, do you think the leaders of Britain and France at the time thought, well, we're declaring World War II?
No, of course not. There was no way they could know how large it would become.
Okay, but it did turn out to be truly a world war. By the end of the fighting in 1945, nearly 60 nations were involved on one side or the other. And millions and millions and millions of people were killed in that war. It's just unimaginable, really, how much destruction took place during that war. Well, let's find out what happened to lead up to this war, but before we do, Yvonne, any comments? Okay. Paul, I wonder if you can read now on page 38, the paragraph at the top of the first column.
Britain and France had tried to avoid this war at almost any cost. Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the agreement which ended World War I, Germany was not to rearm. Its military forces were not to exceed 100,000 men. When Hitler came to power in 1933, however, he immediately began to build up Germany's army. Rather than enforce the treaty, Britain and France acquiesced. In 1936, in another violation of the treaty, Hitler sent forces into the demilitarized zone between France and Germany. The other powers again let Hitler have his way.
Thank you, Paul. All right, so we see that Britain and France didn't really want to go to war with Germany. They tried to avoid this war at almost any cost. Phoebe, what does it mean to avoid something at any cost?
Well, you try to do anything, you almost pay any cost to avoid a certain thing. And so we see from this paragraph that Germany had violated some terms of agreement, and Britain and France didn't do anything to curtail that or to stop that because they didn't want to have war. So they were willing to pay that cost.
That's right. World War I, or the First World War, had been a terrible war. They didn't want to repeat it. Britain and France were tired of war. They did not want to go back to war. And they were hoping that Hitler could be satisfied, and at some point he would say, okay, that's enough, and I'm not going to cause any more trouble, and then everybody could live peacefully. But of course, Adolf Hitler didn't do that. He kept pressing for more and more. But the Treaty of Versailles was the agreement which ended World War I. Who won World War I? Did the Germans win that war, Paul?
No, they were defeated.
Okay, and so when this treaty was made, it imposed very strict terms on Germany, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and in fact, Germany, in a sense, was responsible for the beginning of World War I, and the other nations in Europe said, we don't want you to do this again, and so we're going to try to prevent you from doing this again. What were some of the terms of that treaty?
Well, Germany was not allowed to rearm. They were not allowed to redevelop their army, and they were limited to having 100,000 men in their army.
That's not very much, is it, really, for a large country like Germany?
No, it's not.
They wanted to keep the army small enough. The other countries wanted Germany's army to be so small that it could not successfully attack other countries. Maybe it would be large enough to defend part of the country, but they didn't want it to become an invasion force. But what happened when Hitler came to power, Phoebe?
He immediately began to build up Germany's army. So right away he started to make it bigger, add more people.
Okay, and they developed weapons. There were certain weapons they weren't supposed to have, but he immediately got people busy developing all kinds of new weapons, building up the armed forces. And what did Britain and France do in response to that, Paul?
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. They acquiesced. They might have said a few things like, excuse us, Mr. Hitler, you shouldn't be doing this. But they didn't actually try to stop him. They did not enforce the treaty. Normally, if there is a treaty in place and a country disobeys the treaty or does not follow the terms, what could happen, Phoebe?
They could declare war.
Okay, they could say, look, you didn't learn your lesson yet. We're going to fight some more until you're willing to live by the terms of the treaty. But they were afraid to do that. We have a special word for this policy that Britain and France followed during the 30s. It was called appeasement. They appeased Hitler. They thought, well, if we give him what he wants, then he won't want anything else. Did this policy work?
Obviously not.
And you'll hear this word often used, the term appeasement, in relation to Hitler. And it's a great example for the whole world of the danger of appeasing somebody who is evil, because they're not going to be satisfied. And if you don't stop them, they will just keep doing more wrong. So Britain and France acquiesced. They just allowed Hitler to do what he wanted to do. And he didn't stop there, did he, Phoebe, just building up his armed forces?
No, he also violated the treaty by sending forces into the demilitarized, I can't say that word.
Demilitarized.
Demilitarized zone between France and Germany.
Okay, now, Paul, what's a demilitarized zone?
That's an area where it is clearly marked out that no troops from either side are allowed to be there. Probably the demilitarized zone that we're most familiar with now is the zone between North and South Korea, where there's a wide area. Often the trees are cut down. It's very open to make sure that no military forces move into those areas.
The reason there was a demilitarized zone in this area between France and Germany is because this is an area where they were fighting in World War I. And after World War I, a certain territory had been transferred from German control to French control. And to keep it safe from conflict and fighting, to keep the armies separated, the powers said, we'll have a demilitarized zone here. Neither France nor Germany can bring their forces in. That way, it's like a buffer between the two countries, and they hoped it would prevent fighting. Well, Hitler marched his forces into the demilitarized zone, and nobody could stop him because there were no forces there. It was like an empty zone. And he just went right in and dared the other countries to stop him. And, of course, they again let Hitler have his way. He was quite a character, wasn't he? He came to power, and I think his policy was, do whatever you need to do to get power. He really wasn't guided by any morals or any sense of right or wrong or anything like that. The highest value for him was simply power. And he was dealing with countries that were somewhat civilized. You know, the rulers of Britain had a sort of a code of honor, and there's a way you expect people to behave. And when somebody is ruthless, it's hard to deal with them if you are guided by some sense of morality. So Hitler really took advantage of this.
Well, and he took advantage of the situation in Germany at the time, too. I mean, the people of Germany, I would say, were pretty civilized people, too, except that after World War I, their country was so ruined, and when Hitler came into power, they were in such a terrible depression, and so looked down upon by the rest of Europe, that they were so desperate, they were willing to do almost anything to regain some sense of dignity and power.
That's true. And also, some of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were very, very tough for Germany. The other countries insisted that Germany make very high payments to repay the damage, reparations, they were called reparations payments, and Germany could not afford them. And so Germany's economy was in a terrible state. People were very poor, there was depression, and partly the other countries were responsible for this. And so Hitler said, look, they're not treating us fairly. We need to do something about this. And when people saw that he was a strong leader, that he could stand up to those other countries, they were willing to follow him. As we look around the world today, I think we can see that in some countries, such as Russia, similar conditions exist for the rise of a person like Hitler, a strong leader who will restore pride, restore strength and dignity to the people, but at the same time might cause serious danger. Yvonne, any comment?
我们看到第4行讲到这个 Treaty of Versailles， 它是指 Treaty 就是指这种条约，那这个就是指很有名的凡尔赛条约。到第6行 Rearm 是重整军备的意思。第8行 Exceed 就是超过。下面第12行 Enforce 是强行或者是执行实施的意思。到下面第14行Acquiesce。它这个是用作动词，就是默许或者是默从的意思。15行 violation 是违反。16行demilitarized 就是撤出军队或者是非军事区。
Thank you, Yvonne. Well, let's go on now. We're near the bottom of the first column on page 38. Phoebe, can you read through to the end, please?
In 1938, the Germans occupied Austria. Next, Hitler demanded control of land in western Czechoslovakia. In March 1939, Germany occupied all of Czechoslovakia. It seemed Hitler was going to conquer Eastern Europe with little resistance. But the German invasion of Poland was the last straw for Britain and France. The war was finally on.
Thank you. So we see this process over the decade of the 30s of Hitler just doing more and more to restore Germany's power, to expand Germany's territory. He built up the army first. I guess that would be the first step, really, in preparing to conquer. You have to get your military forces in shape. Then he occupied this area in France, between France and Germany. And then in 1938, the Germans occupied Austria. Paul, did they have to fight? Was there a war before the Germans came into Austria? Or were the Austrians willing to go along with Germany?
The Austrians were willing to go along. There was some opposition. Some people were not real happy with it. But before World War I, Germany and Austria had been one large empire, and some of the people were looking back to the power and glory of those days, and Austria allowed Germany to come in.
And the people in those two countries are closely related. They speak the same language, German, and had a lot in common. And I think many Austrians saw Nazi Germany as the right thing, a way to glory for the great German people. There were also many people, German-speaking people, living in western Czechoslovakia. This was called the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. And he demanded control of that land. He said, the Germans in this area are not being treated fairly. We want to control this land and let these people live under German rule. And there was a big conference in Munich, and the leaders of England and France went there, and they talked it over with Hitler, and they said to him, okay, you can take over the Sudetenland, but this is the last step. After this, you can't go any further. And there was a famous statement by Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England. He had a piece of paper in his hand as he got off the airplane, and he said, this means peace in our time. He agreed. We let him have the Sudetenland. The poor government of Czechoslovakia had nothing to say about it. It was these other countries deciding what was going to happen. But Chamberlain said, peace in our day. Hitler has agreed. This is the last step. And of course, it wasn't, was it, Phoebe?
No, the appeasement didn't work.
No, more appeasement, and Hitler just thought, hey, I'm on a roll. This is working. These people are so stupid, I can just do whatever I want. And I think he realized they were afraid of him. And that's what a bully will do. As long as people are afraid of the bully, he will do what he wants to do. Well, in March 1939, Germany occupied all of Czechoslovakia. It wasn't just Western Czechoslovakia they wanted. They wanted the whole thing. And it seemed as if Hitler was just going to march through Eastern Europe and maybe eventually Western Europe as well with very little resistance. Was anybody going to say, far enough, you can't go any further? Then he decided to invade Poland. That was September 1st, 1939. The Germans quickly came into Poland, quickly overwhelmed the Polish forces. And what was this for Britain and France?
It was the last straw.
Okay, that's going to take some explanation, Paul. What does it mean, the last straw?
Well, it means that it was finally too much. Things had been building up to such a level that one more thing was too much. We have another phrase in English where we talk about the straw that broke the camel's back. The idea is a camel carrying a large load of straw, so much that finally you just put one more straw on and the camel's back breaks. You can't take any more.
Okay, so it's that final act, that one last thing, it may be just a little thing, which causes the crisis. It's the last straw. And in this case, straw does not mean shiguan. It's dry grass, the animal food. Okay, so when Germany invaded Poland, Britain and France finally decided we can't let this continue anymore. We must act. We must face Germany and fight against them. And so the war was finally on. They said, Hitler, we are declaring war. We're going to fight you. And I don't know whether they really expected to win, but they decided we have to take a stand. And of course, it wasn't long after that Germany invaded and overran France. And then Britain was alone in all of Europe, her finest hour in all of history, standing against the might of Germany. Yvonne, any comments?
好，我们看到中间这个 column 第一行 conquer 就是战胜的意思，下面第四行 invasion 是指入侵，到最后第三个段落第二行第二行讲到这个 the last straw， 这边 straw 是指这个干草哈，或者是茅草，这边是指说在引发对立或者是抗争之前忍无可忍的最后一个挑衅。
Thank you, Yvonne. Well, before we go any further, let's listen to this.
Hey, you! Aren't you one of those German soldiers?
Yeah, that's me.
What are you doing here? I don't like you.
Well, we are building up our military forces.
That's what I heard, but don't you know you're not allowed?
Not, what do you mean?
Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, you agreed not to build up your military forces.
Oh, that is old news. But soon we are going to take back all of our homeland.
Oh, who does this Hitler think he is? He's leading you into trouble.
Yeah, well then we're going to send our forces into a demilitarized zone between France and Germany.
But that is not allowed, I'm telling you.
Oh, no problem.
What are you trying to do? Start a war or something?
No, then we're going to occupy Austria.
You can't do that. Austria's such a beautiful land and you have no business being there.
Yeah, then Hitler, he's going to demand control of Western Czechoslovakia.
Oh, not
Czechoslovakia, we would fight you about this, but we won't. We're going to avoid war at almost any cost.
Then the next is going to be the invasion of Poland.
Poland? You would invade Poland?
Yeah.
Well, that is the last straw. The war is on.
Okay, well, the war was finally on, but for America, it was not finally on. Paul and Phoebe, you're both Americans. Can you explain how quite a long time later America got involved in the war, and why didn't America declare war at this point? Why didn't America say, as America so often does today, hey, Hitler, what you're doing is not right. We're going to stop you. I mean, America did this with Saddam Hussein. They did it with Milosevic in Yugoslavia, and they did it in Panama. They did it in Grenada. Why did America not jump into the war back then?
Well, I think, to answer the question from a little different direction, I think many of the reasons that the U.S. has done things like that since World War II is because we did not at that time. America wanted to try to avoid the war, just like Britain and France wanted to try to avoid the war, and it was only when things got so bad that they saw there was no other way and a huge threat that they finally got involved. But because of that, the war was much worse than it might have been had all of these countries gotten involved earlier.
All right. Well, Phoebe, why did America eventually get into the war?
Well, what ended up happening was Pearl Harbor was finally attacked by the Japanese, and when the war directly affected us as a country, then we felt like we had to get involved.
Okay, so when America did join the war, it wasn't even really directly related to Europe. It had something to do with something going on in the Pacific, far away from Europe. But Japan and Germany were allies working together, and so by various means, America got more involved in the war in Europe. Well, there has been a change in American policy since World War II. In fact, after the Second World War, the United States became very involved in Europe, didn't it, Paul?
Well, it's true. Part of that is through being involved in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where the United States made an official commitment to most of the nations in Western Europe to participate together with them to protect their peace.
In fact, since World War II, it seems that America has literally defended Europe, not against the Germans in this case, though. What has the potential enemy been in Europe, Phoebe, since World War II?
I believe Russia.
Yeah, Russia and the Soviet Union. There's been that threat over the years, and it hasn't gone away entirely. And as I said earlier in this program, I think we need to watch Russia. We respect Russia, and we hope they do well, but we know that they're in serious trouble economically. Politically, things are very confused. The Russian people are feeling very angry and upset about what's happened in Russia. They've lost the empire, the Soviet Union, and it seems as if, in many ways, the conditions are similar to what they were in Germany in the early 30s. And there are even people in Russia who sound a lot like Hitler when they talk. There are some people there who say the same kinds of things, about Russian nationalism, and we need to build up the motherland and get our empire back and restore our pride and not be afraid of the Americans. So, I hope history does not repeat itself, but it might. Time will tell. We need to keep our eye on the headlines, don't we? Well, thank you for being with us, students. We hope you've learned some interesting vocabulary and perhaps learned some of the background for some of these things from a foreigner's perspective, an American perspective. And we hope you'll join us again in our next program in the advanced class. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.